Hey folks, we're back and we're going to be working on the user interface side of our Tetris project. But before we got going with too much code, I wanted to talk a little bit about what you're going to see if you haven't done too much work with LiveView yet. So this is what we're looking at. Everything's going to come in the standard way to an endpoint through some type of route. And then we're going to call the mount function where we'll establish a little bit of data. And then we'll pipe that same data to a render function, and the render's job is it's a straight function which creates some HTML, and this function is kind of the center of the LiveView universe. So if we're working with things from this point, and if we don't have anything else in the application, all we're doing is setting a little bit of data, and then based on that data, we're building a LiveView, a view. But until there's something else that changes the data, there's nothing that makes it live. There's nothing that makes it interactive. What's interesting is that at some point, we can take this live view and attach a gen server to it. So the state from that rendered function comes down, the same state that we mounted. It comes in the form of a socket. We feed it into a gen server, which means that we're going to wait for input. So at some point, something's going to happen in the application, and we're going to have to handle that input. And when that some type of event comes in, it's going to call back into the render function, which means that now we can change the data. And if we change it from the OTP perspective, it's going to come in through handle info. And these are the things that you've already used if you're familiar with Phoenix. It can come in through any kind of process, like a timer. It can also come in from another gen server or a pub sub. Or here's what makes it interesting. There's some JavaScript, not JavaScript that you'll write. We won't write any JavaScript at all in this application, but some that comes with a framework where anytime a link is pressed or a key is pressed or a form is submitted or a handful of other events happen, I can take these events and I can feed them back into handle event, which is just another piece of the gen server. And based on that, I can modify my socket and I could feed that socket back into the render function. So if you think about it, there's two pieces that are interesting here. The piece on the top, we can work for a long time in our application by just fixing some static data in the mount function. So, for example, if we're building a bunch of users, well, I could hard code a bunch of users in the mount. And then I can change those users and as I'm adding features to the HTML. And once that looks like I want it to in that render function, which might be a pure function, it might be a template, but once that looks like I want it to, and I'm ready to add some interactive composition to it, then I shift to the bottom of this graph, and it looks like this. So at that point, then I'm looking at essentially the flow of the data through the ecosystem. And so looking at things with the top and the bottom, with the pure function, with static data, and then the bottom function that then makes that data dynamic is an extraordinarily productive way to write. So it basically lets us compartmentalize what we're working on at any given time. And we don't have to worry about both sides of the wire. We don't have to worry about the client and the server. Our heads are firmly fixed on the server. All we have to do is build a function that takes in data and spits out HTML, and then we think about how to change that function. So if you're familiar with React, it's a little bit like React. If you're familiar with Elm, it's a little bit like Elm. But this is a wonderful way to work. And so through this next couple of sessions, we're going to work with Phoenix LiveView to build our Tetris games. And there's a couple of concepts that I want you to look for. First, I want you to look at how powerful it is to have coded our Tetris bricks with reducers. And the last thing that I want you to pay attention to is we're going to use a concept called SVG, which is a graphics format that you can embed straight into HTML. And it might be something that you haven't seen before, but even if your application is not a game like ours is, that has a sophisticated game loop and things like that, SVG is often a way to get some realistic looking components without dropping into JavaScript on the client side. So it's going to be a full couple of videos. When you're done with the videos, you'll have a better sense of how the LiveView ecosystem works, how to work with reducers, how to shape and package your code, and even how to do things like work with dependencies and work with inbound events. So I hope you have fun during this process. So I'm going to type mix Phoenix new. I haven't typed the application name yet because I want to take a look at some options so that we don't get bogged down on building the database out. I'm going to use an option called no ecto. It's this option right here. And basically what that's going to do for us, it's not going to increase or to include all the ecto code. But what that also means is that not all the generators are going to work because most of those have database components to them as well. So I think that sometimes in an instructional video, it's helpful to see how code is created without the benefit of code generation. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to say mix phx.new, and the application name is no ecto. The application name is what we're going to call this Tetris UI. The application name must start with a letter and have only lowercase letters. So let's do this. Okay. And so the first question that we get is, do we want to fetch and install dependencies? And I'm going to say yes. And basically what this means is, are we going to run npm install for us? And you can see that being run right here. And basically it's saying it's setting up the development mode for Webpack. And we're going to use those facilities. So we're going to go ahead and ask for that install. We'll let this finish up. And then once this finishes up, what's happening here? Okay, it looks like we're there. Now Phoenix is giving us a couple of examples. It's telling us what to do next. So we're going to cd Tetris UI. I'm going to say mix phoenix.server. I think that's probably going to be a good way to run it. So let's go ahead and start this up, and we'll go to localhost 4000. Might have, no, this is working just fine. So let's go to localhost 4000, and we can see that our Phoenix installation is working just fine. So it's a great place to stop and take stock. That's what we're going to do. When we come back, we're going to go ahead and set up the LiveView dependencies and then think about where we're going to go from there. As you can see, I've broken out of the server. So now we need to install the LiveView, and there are a couple of different pieces to doing that job. So I'm at the project Phoenix Framework / Phoenix LiveView up here. And if you notice, there are some installation instructions on HexDocs, and that's the one we'll use because I'd prefer to build this on a stable version. So it says to add the dependency first, and I'm just going to whip through these really quickly. That's not quickly. So I'm going to say atom, the current file. So now I'm in my new project, mix.exs. So it has asked us to add a couple of dependencies, and I'm going to do that now. So one of them is for test. I'm not sure if we're going to get to the LiveView testing or not. We'll just see how long this video series gets. So mix deps.get. Okay, so it's fetching the dependencies. It's gotten them just fine. It looks like we're working on Phoenix LiveView 041. The next step is to establish the signing salt. But in order for us to do that, we're going to need to generate a secret. So let's do that now. Okay, now I've got my secret. And so it says to plug this in the config.exs under the application's endpoint. And for us, this is going to be Tetris UI. So let's go there now. So we're going to config. We're going to config EXS, and there's an endpoint, Tetris UI with the endpoint. And we're going to drop that chunk of code in right there. And it's the code that came from this, right? So we're in the endpoint, and now we need to add another configuration key. So these are basically key value pairs, and we're going to add one of those key value pairs. So there's the comma, and now we're going to take the signing salt that we created, and we're going to drop it in right there. Okay, so that looks good, and we can now start to work on the router. And below the fetch flash, we need to add this. So we're going to go to the router, the one that we're going to, just so you can track where we are in the code base. This is Tetris Web, and so the router should be right there, and it is. And then right below the fetch flash, we're adding this one. And so next, we need to add some of the macros that we'll need that'll make our lives better. So these are just functions, like we're importing the LiveView controller. So there's a few functions that make the controllers easier to manage. So let's drop that one in. And this goes in basically the imports for our web file. So the web file is in my app web, which for us is Tetris UI web, which is right where we are, Tetris UI web. And this is web.ex. So this is where our macros are. And so I'm dropping this one in. And there are a series of these. We'll whip through these really quickly. And here's the view one. And here we're just importing live router, live render, live link, the 1 and 2 versions, live component, the 2, 3, and 4 Arity versions. So let's drop those in. That looks good. So let's keep a clean indentation for the file there. And for the router, we're going to import the LiveView router. This is going to give us the live route. So let's do that now. So the router. So now when we go to our router file to enter our Tetris route, this will be pretty easy to do. So so that's all there is for the web file. So now it's time to update the endpoint, and so we're going to need to add a socket. So this is the Tetris Web endpoint. Right there, there's a socket. So let's just go right above that one. And so now there's a socket. There's a socket called under socket, and there's also one for the live. So we want a socket exclusively for LiveView, and that's going to establish communication for all the LiveView tasks. And then the last couple of pieces are related to my assets. So you can see that there's something we have to add in package JSON. And it's different if it's an umbrella. Ours is not. And then there's an npm dependency. We're going to run npm to install our new dependency. And then there's a couple things that we add to the app and CSS. So let's start to get cranking on these. So these should already be there. We're going to add this one. So we're going to package.json, which should be in the assets directory. There it is, package JSON. Dependencies, we're going to add a third one here. I have no idea what I did there. Oh, I fat fingered and brought up the search. So pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So and then this isn't an additional step. This is telling us what we do if there's an umbrella. We're not an umbrella, so we're good. So let's go ahead and install these assets. Basically, we could have changed directory to assets, and then we could have done an npm install. And instead, we're gonna prefix the assets. There's a couple of vulnerabilities here. I recommend that you do this from a fresh and current npm installation, and then some of those vulnerabilities will go away. I'm not going to try to chase these right now. Basically, I need this level of npm for another couple of mentoring projects that I'm working on, and none of that's going to be deployed in production, so I am good. So now we've installed the assets, and it's time to work on the JavaScript. So we need app.js right here. We're going to add this code. So this is in the right place, assets.js, app.js. And so let's go ahead and drop those in there. So they're just a couple of imports so that LiveView can use the socket the way that we want it to, and then connect to the socket and keep that connection running. If we want to, we can add the app CSS. I'm not sure if we're going to need this. And you can see that there's also another set of instructions in case it's a umbrella project. Ours is not. Not sure if we're going to need this, but just so we don't chase our tails debugging, we'll go ahead and add it. And basically, this is a couple of CSS features that, for things like error fields and things of that nature that would make our job easier. Since we're a game and we'll probably not be using the game features or any forms, then we'll probably be good with that particular piece. So now we ought to be able to, we should be good to go. So mix phoenix.server. Okay, it looks like we're pulling everything up, and it looks like we are running just fine. Just for grins, we'll go ahead and run localhost 4000, and it looks like we're running fine. We'll jump over here to make sure that there aren't any blatant errors, and it looks like we're okay. So we'll leave any cleanup for next time. We're about 20 minutes, so it's time to cut over to another video. And so we'll take stock of where we are, and we will see you soon. Next installment, we're going to just do some basic playing with LiveView so you can get a good understanding of what's happening.